Hi there. My name is Alkiholic. Actually, no, that's not my real name, but I've been called that quite a bit throughout my life, throughout my family, and all that stuff. How do you like this? My backdrop here. I spent $1 billion on it in production, post production, then lighting, and then there's a million grips here and a green screen and all that stuff. And no, I'm just kidding. Anyways, um, um, uh, I'm older, and then I'm going to talk about some of my regrets. But I'm not going to talk about financial, or actually, that would have an impact on financial in a lot of different ways. That some I can't even talk about. Basically, uh, I have, I have, I'll talk about my alcohol and my drug use. So this is life as someone that's as old as I am. I've spent most of my life under the influence of drugs and alcohol. I consider alcohol a drug. They like to divide it, but it's the same to me. So I first remember being on drugs since I was born, which means my parents were drugging my food. So my parents were drugging my food so bad that I couldn't concentrate on my school, my academics. They were drugging my food so much. Like I knew after I ate my food that I felt, uh, I knew that they had put chemicals in my food, drugs. And sometimes it was so bad I would go eat at my friend's house and say, no, I don't need dinner, because they would spike my food, which is a horrible thing to do to a kid. And they did it for nefarious purposes. And I'm not going to get into detail about it, but it involved abuse. We'll just put it that way. So I was easier to take advantage of, manipulate, and control because my parents had me addicted to drugs. I became addicted later, but they were placing me on drugs. They were placing me on food and all that stuff. Ironically, we had shotguns and pistols and guns laying around the house and all that stuff. So my parents were involved in organized crime, and my parents were drug dealers. So that's how I grew up. So like, by looking at me, you think that I just had the good old jolly old normal whatever, or like I don't have that look on my face, or like if you look at my arms, I don't have tracks because I only used IV drugs for I was a junkie for to be straight up. So I'll start off from square one, and then we'll work our way up. Anyway, so my parents were spiking my food, drugging my food since I was born, and they're doing it for nefarious purposes because they were sending. It's a long story, but I was seeing psychiatrists, different psychiatrists going through psychotherapy as far as back as I can remember. It was nerve wracking seeing all these shrinks and all these doctors and having them ask me questions. So even in real life now, today as an adult, if someone comes up and they start firing a bunch of questions at me really quick, I just shut down because I saw so many psychiatrists and doctors I can't even remember since I was a kid, and they were doping me up on drugs and sending me to different psychiatrists and doctors and everything. And what's really odd is I was in this one mental hospital and I saw like 30 different psychiatrists. And I said, what's my prognosis? What's my diagnosis? They have a book called the DSM-3. They have a PDR that tells you what drugs are. They have a Merck manual that tells you what drugs are. The quote unquote legal drugs, right? So, uh, anyways, I was seeing all these different psychiatrists, and then my parents were, they were interacting with high level people. So they're interacting with people in the mafia. They were interacting with politicians. They were interacting with different people from different countries. And they also had huge parties with drugs at them. And then we had strange things happen because of that. We had some of the babysitters. Well, I mean, we had all kinds of crazy behavior that goes along with that. Drug, how a person behaves on drugs, it depends on the drug and the person. There's a lot of variables of what can go on. So I was mostly given downers like Quaaludes as far back as I can remember, and Percodan and all that stuff, and Dexedrine and everything, up and down, sideways, and all that stuff. And then my parents would have people come over at all different times of night and day. So I'd come downstairs and I'd see my dad talking to a police officer at 3 a.m. And they were doing a deal. And I would just quietly walk back upstairs and climb back in my bed. And that house, crazy house, I'm sure they did a lot of remodeling because that house was altered in a lot of different ways. Before they sold it, they cleaned up the evidence, so to speak, and all that stuff. So they were dealers, and so my dad would leave at different times, odd times, this and that. We'd have strangers over, this and that. I mean, back in the day, they weren't looking for that. Those years ago, like an area with high traffic. The neighbors pretty much, I think they knew, like, but nothing. So since they were involved, they were in the organization or organized crime or whatever. There was no collateral damage, or there wasn't shootouts or robberies or drug deals gone bad. We never had any of that happen. That happens, but it was all organized, so it was just mainly money trading hands and drugs trading hands and everything, and then me being doped up on drugs. So about 8 years old, I think they stopped spiking me, putting drugs in my food, or I could at least eat a big school lunches, and avoid dinner if I could. So I would avoid being spiked. But then I eventually, from that exposure, I became a drug addict. I became addicted to drugs. And also both my parents smoked, so I was a smoker too. That was back when smoking didn't cause cancer. Smoking didn't cause cancer back then because they said it didn't. It wasn't until long court battles and everything that they related smoking as being bad in cancer. So both of my parents smoked. Both of my parents were abusing drugs or using drugs, however you want to say it, and alcohol. And that's how I grew up. And yeah, so I grew up in that household of drug dealing and crazy behavior and everything because um, depending on the person, people can get into altered states of consciousness that are unpredictable or unstable when they're under drugs. Like I have so regret like I did PCP for like a year. We were shooting PCP. Is that freaking crazy? I mean, smoking it is enough. You could, like pure PCP, if you got a doobie and you smoked it, you could get 15 people high, just hallucinating. I mean, out of all the drugs I did in my life, PCP was wild. I mean, it was like walking into a cartoon. It was like normally you watch a cartoon on TV. This was like you were in the cartoon. So when I was on angel dust, PCP, ether paradigm, and embalming fluid or whatever chemicals you use to make it, I had full visual hallucinations so bad that I couldn't trust what I saw. Like I didn't know when I was looking or thinking if it was real or fake. I had no idea. My hearing. So my hearing was altered to where I didn't know what was real, my sense of time, everything. I mean, PCP was the most freaking wild drug I've ever had in my life. I mean, it was like once you took that stuff, you had no idea what was going to happen. I mean, I woke up in different states in different countries, physically waking up, coming out of the state, coming off of the stuff, maybe days, maybe a few weeks later, and I had no idea where I was and what I did. Um, the only other drug that did that, acid, I always remembered my acid trips. We used to have acid parties. Like you would go to a special hall, like a grunge hall or something. They'd rent it out, and you have like an acid band in the basement playing psychedelic music, like the Grateful Dead or whoever, and then you'd be tripping on it. And so you had a choice when you went in the party. You'd pay like $10, and you could all you they wouldn't let you, like they'd write on your cup that you were either on acid or you were on mushrooms. Yeah. So we had acid parties, and so they would write on your cup. For some reason, they didn't want you mixing acid and mushrooms. So if you want, you could decide whether you wanted to go with acid or you wanted to go with mushrooms. And so you just every time you wanted some more, but it was like an hour delay because it takes a while for it to hit. So there was like a time limit on it, how often you could fill up your cup. So I went to acid parties and all that stuff. But I remember the acid parties. But my experience with PCP is there's loss of time. Yeah, so that's one of my regrets is loss of time. And then currently, I'm Alkiholic. I'm alkiholic. You can Google that. Alkiholic. So I'm an alcoholic. So, anyways, and I almost have it 7 years free, which this is the second time I've gotten 7 years off of drugs and alcohol, and I could spend, I could do a week's worth of stories or a month's worth of stories or a year's worth of stories because of being under the influence and the crazy stuff I did and saw when I was on chemicals and drugs and all that. So PCP was the most wild. Acid, I would at least remember. I always remembered my trips afterwards, like what I did. Like the acid party to this day I went to in Ballard, I still remember that. Um, and alcohol was the other chemical. So alcohol with me, they call as blackouts. Or a friend of mine that was black didn't like me saying blackouts, so he wanted me to use the words anesthetized. So I used that word, and I would have complete memory loss. So it could be from the night before, it could be for a week, and it could be up to a month and months of memory loss from alcohol. Whereas some other people, they drink daily 6 pack of beer until they're 90 and they can recount every second of their life. I have big blank spots or years of missing. And also, I was crazy. Like, I didn't want to live past, I am crazy, but uh, back, so back on the shrink thing, I'm going to be jumping around. They never came out with a diagnosis other than I have PTSD. Part of that is the abuse, and part of that is circumstances and people and situations I got involved in. Um, like being shot at or having people try to kill me and all that stuff, but that's a different story. I'm just going to stick with my alcohol and my drug, I guess they call abuse. So it affected my ability to make more money. It affected my trading abilities. It affected my abilities and all that stuff in a lot of different ways. It affected my coordination. Like I said, alcohol, I always fully blacked out and all that stuff. But I knew, I was smart enough to know when I was under the influence of those chemicals or alcohol or drugs or all that stuff, was to refrain from a fight. Because if you're drunk and you fight, you're going to lose. Because you lose your coordination, your motor skills, and all that stuff. So I never got into fights when I was drunk. Now, on PCP, that's a different story, or acid, it's a different story. You might be a better fighter if you get involved in a conflict and it escalates to that level. But I can't, because of my genetics, I can't drink alcohol like a normal person. There is no normal person, but some people can have a few beers and stop. I have never, ever in my life been able to have just one drink and stop. Once I have a drink of alcohol in my body, a pint or a couple pints, I can't stop until I'm in another country or state or world or passed out on a bed and somewhere in my vomit or in a yard or wherever. So it was like rolling the dice. It'd be like going to a casino or rolling the dice or playing a card game where you don't know the outcome. If I drink alcohol, I don't know what the outcome will be. I don't know when I will be able to stop and all this and that. So um, I've done the best Coke you can get. That's another story. Um, I could spend a ton of time on that one. Um, I could get the best heroin you could get. I could get the best fentanyl you can get. I could get the best of all the drugs that you can get. And the real Quaaludes, the 714s and 712s, my parents had jars with thousands of Valiums and Quaaludes and Demerals and Perkinins and all that because they were dealers. So on the pharmaceutical drugs, they would have the amount that a pharmacy would have at home. for real. I'm not cooking this up, but it was like I was living in a pharmacy. My parents were a drug dealer, and we had the amount of drugs in the house that were equivalent to a pharmacy, and actually the variety of drugs that were equivalent to a pharmacy. So they had everything and all this and that. But like I said earlier in my life, when I was on the drugs, when they're putting me on the drugs and I'm seeing all the psychiatrists, I might have already said this, they gave me no official diagnosis or prognosis. Like, we're giving you these drugs because you're ADD or ADHD or the reasons, or you're schizophrenic or bipolar, as they call it. It's bipolar, it used to be, or whatever, and now it's manic depressive, or it was manic depressive, now it's bipolar. They changed the terminology, and like PTSD is CPTSD now, compound post-traumatic stress disorder. So currently I have that, and I do have residual paranoia, but I'm not going to get into detail about my life about that, because it's not. I wouldn't be talking. I would be talking about things that would incriminate myself or other people, and so I don't want to go there. But yeah. But I got my PTSD from being involved in situations that were attempts on my life. I don't have enough time for that one. That's a full story on all the attempts on my life. People trying to off me, trying to kill me. So, first one was I was supposed to be an abortion, and then I was supposed to be terminated before I even came out of my mom, and then I had tons of times where people tried to off me. Just luck. Or having a heads up or a warning before, or having a gut feeling that something's going to go down and it's not going to be good, and to be ready for it. So I was born in and around organized crime, and then I had friends that were in the mafia and all this and stuff. They have a show on YouTube. It's called Soft White Underbelly, where you have some people spill their guts about being a prostitute or in the mob and stuff they did, and they give names, dates, and all that stuff. And I approached him one time. I said, I'm willing to talk about my life experience, but I'm not going to give names, dates, any of that information. Take it at that level. I'm not doing that. I'm not going to roll over on anybody. I mean, it's beyond the statute of limitations, as far as I know, everything I was involved in, but it's no reason to roll over. So people that I knew that were involved in the cartels or mafias and different stuff and this and that, they knew if they rolled over, they were history. So a couple friends of mine got killed because they ratted out, like they said, this one gal, a friend of mine, beautiful, just gorgeous. She cut a plea deal where she ratted out or rolled over. What do you call it? Whistleblower. And then they found her deceased. And then, so from my experience from dealing around those people and in that environment, they would just keep their mouths shut until they get bailed out or they get out. And so in a few situations, one time I was set up or whatever. God, there's so many different ways I can tell this. But I'll just stick to, so my regrets would be loss of financial stability, situations I got into, car wrecks, money it cost me, lost opportunities, um, the negative sides, chunks of my life that are gone, that I know from other people that were blackout drinkers. I would ask them, they'd have like 40 years sober, and I'd say, "Do you ever get those memories back?" And they'd say, "No, they're gone." So unless they're stored in a cloud somewhere, there's a lot of my life I can't access through PTSD. I can get some. Some is by just watching my current behavior. So, why do I feel this way in this moment? And I know it's tied to the past. But that's a tricky one because it couldn't be from genetics. Like it could have been something that happened in your family tree or whatever thousands of years ago that's a memory or something that's in your DNA that came with you to your current state, but that's a whole different story. But um, so I I don't plan on going back anymore. Now there's some people that say, "Oh God, it was always bad and horrible," and all they do is talk about the negative aspects of everything and all that and stuff and all that. And I partied like hell. I enjoyed it, or I wouldn't have done it. And I wasn't doing it because I was raised sideways on the potty thing or anything. I mean, maybe I got involved in it because my parents were dealers, but um, no one forced that stuff on me. I had it forced on me as a kid, but as an adult, I voluntarily went on trips and vacations, and I love to get plastered. I love to get messed up. And also, I was on 3 or 4 different chemicals at the same time, or 5. I was never on just one drug. I was always on 8, 10, 12. No, I was always on at least 4 drugs at the same time, which is suicidal. It's crazy. But it took that much to do the job. And then what I'd do is I'd switch drugs. So, like, if my tolerance level went up on one drug, then I'd switch to another drug and then another drug and another drug. But the one drug that I couldn't control was alcohol. So I could stop fentanyl. Like I said, I got the best coke you can get, really pure, and heroin and all that other stuff, and fentanyl and everything else. But the alcohol was the one where I could not control. The other drugs I could control, I could say I've had enough, or I could stop cocaine or heroin or whatever. But the alcohol, I could never. Once I took the alcohol, that was the end game. There was no stopping or quitting or anything. The other drugs I could stop taking if I wanted to, but a lot of people just look at the downsides and all that. I wouldn't have done it for all those years unless I enjoyed partying like crazy. I mean, to be straight up. I had a lot of good times and all that stuff. I just quit, or I'm now, because my body can't handle it anymore. I'm too old. Like if I go on a trip now and leave the farm, I might never come back. I'm I, the jig is up, the game is up. I'm done because I know that my body can't tolerate it anymore. It's had its limit. I've reached my max, so I'm pretty much done, far as I know. I can't predict the future, but so far I have 7 years clean and sober, and that's the truth. And I'll get it going here in a couple weeks if I make it then.